You know how sometimes you really want to get a handle on a complex subject, like properly understand it deep down, but without getting totally overwhelmed?
Yeah, avoiding that information overload feeling.
Exactly. Well, that's what we're aiming for today on the deep dive. We're going to explore this really fascinating journey, not of a specific historical figure, but more of an archetype.
Right, the archetype of the leader, the general, as depicted in, well, a classic text, The Art of War.
Ah, okay. So the art of war is our source material. And our main character isn't one person, but this ideal leader figure that emerges from the text.
That's the idea. It's not a story in the traditional sense, with a plot and characters in that way. But if you look closely, the principles, the advice, the warnings, they all build this incredibly detailed picture of a leader. Their journey, their thinking, what they need, the tactics they use, all of it.
That makes sense. It's like extracting a character study from a treatise on strategy.
Precisely. And what makes it even richer, I think, is that the source material isn't just Sun Tzu's core text. We also have layers of commentary, historical examples added over centuries, different thinkers weighing in.
So it's a multi-layered perspective on this leader's path. Gives us more to chew on.
Definitely. So, our mission, if you like, for this deep dive is to trace that journey. We want to pull out the essential insights about this leader.
Okay, what kind of things are we talking about?
Well, everything from their initial strategic mindset, their practical needs, resources, costs, to the tactics they employ. Deception, naturally, plays a huge part.
Uh-huh.
Then there's leadership itself, the qualities needed, the relationship with the ruler or sovereign, how they connect with their troops, their understanding of the environment, what the text calls heaven and earth.
Right, the physical terrain, but maybe broader conditions too.
Exactly. Morale, espionage, which is surprisingly detailed, momentum, formations, and then, of course, the ultimate outcomes, victory and defeat.
Wow, okay. That's comprehensive, the whole arc.
We'll try to make it comprehensive, but also, digestible. Give you, the listener, that solid understanding without getting bogged down.
Great. So for anyone listening, wanting to grasp this leader's journey, where does it fundamentally begin? What's step one?
Well, interestingly, it doesn't start on the battlefield. It starts in the mind, in calculation.
Before any action is taken.
Absolutely. Chapter 1 is quite clear. Victory is often decided before the battle, through careful planning and calculation in the temple, as it puts it. Lots of calculation means likely victory. Little calculation means likely defeat.
So the journey starts with deep strategic thought. It's all about the prep work. For you listening, maybe it's like really thinking through a business plan before launching.
Exactly like that. No impulsive moves. This leader has to systematically consider what Sun Tzu calls the 5 constant factors.
Okay, what are those?
They are the moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, and method and discipline. These are like the pillars of their initial strategy.
Can you break those down a bit? Moral law sounds significant.
Yeah, it is. It's about the people being in accord with their ruler, willing to follow them regardless of danger. Think of it like a strong company culture or shared values today. People believing in the mission.
Right, and heaven and earth.
Heaven refers to broader conditions, night and day, cold and heat, times and seasons. Think external factors, maybe market cycles or timing. Earth is the physical landscape, distances, dangers, open ground, narrow passes, the actual context you're operating in.
Okay, the operational environment.
Then you have the commander, their qualities,
Hmm.
wisdom, sincerity, benevolence, courage, strictness. And finally, method and discipline, the organization, chain of command, logistics, the
Yeah.
systems.
I'm understanding all of that before you start.
Yeah,
That's crucial.
it's the foundation. Without understanding these, you're essentially flying blind.
Now, you mentioned historical anecdotes earlier. There's one that often comes up early on about Sun Tzu and the concubines or ants and girls. What does that tell us about the leader's journey right at the start?
Ah, yes, that's a stark one, isn't it? It's usually in the introductory parts or commentaries. It really hammers home the importance of clear communication and absolute discipline from day one.
How so?
Well, the story goes, Sun Tzu is asked to demonstrate his principles by drilling the king's concubines. He explains the commands clearly. They just giggle. He repeats them, more giggling.
Okay.
So he asks himself, if instructions are not clear, is it the general's fault? He concludes it is. He explains again. They still disobey. Then he says, if instructions are clear but not obeyed, then it is the fault of the officers.
And the officers in this case were the king's favorites.
Exactly. And he has them executed, despite the king's protests. The message is brutal but clear. A leader must ensure their commands are understood, but once understood, disobedience cannot be tolerated if the mission is to succeed. Discipline is paramount.
Wow. So, for anyone listening, that's about establishing authority and the seriousness of the task immediately, setting the standard.
Absolutely. It shows the leader's commitment must be unwavering, even when it's difficult or unpopular. You have to enforce the rules you set.
And this initial strategic phase, it's not just about how to fight, but also when, right?
Oh,
Or even if.
oh, definitely. Chapter 3 really emphasizes this. The supreme art of war, it says, is to subdue the enemy without fighting.
Breaking their resistance without battle.
Precisely. So, a key part of the leader's early journey is developing the wisdom to know when direct confrontation is necessary and when it's better, more excellent, even to achieve the objective through other means strategy, diplomacy, maneuvering.
Avoiding needless conflict that just burns resources. For you listening, that's about finding smarter, less costly ways to win.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Okay, so we have this initial phase. Deep thought, assessing the factors, establishing authority and discipline, and knowing when not to fight. What comes next? What about the practical side of things, the needs?
Right. The leader can't just stay in the realm of thought, they have to deal with the tangible realities. Chapter 2 dives straight into the cost of war.
The economics of it all.
Exactly. Running a campaign is incredibly expensive. Chariots, armor, supplies, transport. It drains the state's resources and burdens the people. The leader has to understand this cost intimately. A long war can bankrupt a nation.
So for you, it's like being acutely aware of the budget and the burn rate for any major project. You can't ignore the financial reality.
You absolutely can't. A prolonged campaign, like a project that drags on forever, can be disastrous, even if you eventually win. The cost might be too high.
So how does the leader manage these resource constraints?
Well, one key strategy mentioned in Chapter 2 is pragmatic forage on the enemy.
Live off the land, but the enemy's land.
Essentially, yes. Use the enemy's resources to supply your own army. This serves two purposes. It feeds your troops and lessens the burden on your own state, and it depletes the enemy's resources.
Big suffer, if ruthless. For listeners, maybe that translates to leveraging a competitor's assets or market position somehow, finding ways to benefit from their situation.
It's about strategic resourcefulness, certainly. Thinking creatively about supply lines, not just relying on your own stockpile. It lessens your own vulnerability.
Okay. And connecting back to avoiding direct conflict, that idea of supreme excellence, how does that ambition shape the leader's approach to needs and resources?
Well, if your goal is to win without fighting or with minimal fighting, you're inherently conserving your own resources and avoiding those massive costs discussed in Chapter 2.
True.
It pushes the leader to prioritize strategies that achieve the objective indirectly. Maybe it's through diplomacy, maybe through disrupting the enemy's alliances or supply lines, maybe through psychological means to break their will to fight. All of these are generally less costly in blood and treasure than a head-on clash.
So that pursuit of a bloodless victory is also economically prudent.
Very much so. It's a core part of the leader's journey, always seeking the most effective and efficient path to the objective.
All right, so the leader is thinking strategically, managing resources, aiming for efficiency. But sometimes conflict is unavoidable. How does the journey proceed into the realm of actual tactics and maneuvering?
This is where things get really dynamic, and the absolute cornerstone mentioned right back in Chapter 1 is deception. All warfare is based on deception.
It keeps coming back to that.
It permeates everything. For the leader on this journey, deception isn't just a tactic you pull out occasionally, it's a constant mindset. You need to mislead the enemy about your location, your intentions, your strength, your weaknesses, everything.
So for you listening, it's about managing perceptions constantly. Not just acting, but managing how your actions are seen.
Precisely. Feign disorder when you're disciplined. Appear weak when you are strong. Bait the enemy. Make them uncertain. That's the goal.
And how does the leader prepare for this tactically?
Chapter 4 talks about making yourself invincible, essentially securing your own position first. This means understanding tactical dispositions, recognizing vulnerabilities in your own setup, and fixing them. You make yourself hard to beat.
So defense first.
In a sense, secure yourself against defeat, and then, crucially, you wait for the enemy to make themselves vulnerable. You wait for the opportunity they provide.
So it's patience combined with readiness. For our listeners, maybe that's like ensuring your own house is in order before you try to expand or take on a competitor.
That's a good analogy. Build a strong base, minimize your risks, and then be alert for when the opponent slips up or exposes a weakness.
Okay. Now, the text talks about different kinds of forces, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Direct and indirect.
Yes, the Cheng, direct, and the Qi, indirect. Chapter 5 explains this. The skilled leader uses both in combination. The direct force engages the enemy, fixes them in place. The indirect force comes from an unexpected direction, attacks a vulnerability, creates surprise.
Like a feint and a flanking maneuver.
Exactly. Think of the historical example sometimes cited, Han Xin marching openly towards Linchin, that's the Cheng, while secretly sending troops across the river elsewhere, that's the Qi. The combinations are endless, making you unpredictable.
So for you, it's about not being one-dimensional in your approach, having multiple angles.
Absolutely. Keep the enemy off balance, and speed is vital here too.
Right. You mentioned speed earlier.
Chapter 5 again likens the quality of decision to the well-timed swoop of a falcon. Quick, decisive action is crucial to exploit those fleeting opportunities created by maneuvering and deception. Hesitation can be fatal.
Get in, achieve the objective, get out, avoid getting bogged down.
Yes. Chapter 2 warns about the dangers of protracted campaigns. Speed and decisiveness help avoid that drain on resources and morale. It creates momentum.
And how does this leader choose where to apply this force, this speed and deception?
Chapter 6 is key here.
Go.
Strike weak points, avoid strong points. Don't attack a fortified city head-on if you can avoid it. Maneuver the enemy. Impose your will on them. Don't let them impose their will on you.
So it's about finding the path of least resistance, but in a strategic way.
Precisely. Make the enemy react to you. Shape the battlefield. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you can anticipate their moves and guide them into unfavorable situations where you can strike effectively.
Okay, this paints a picture of a very calculating, adaptable, and frankly, cunning leader. Let's shift focus a bit towards the leader themselves, the general. What personal qualities does this journey demand?
Well, Chapter 3 calls the general the bulwark of the state. So first and foremost, there's a sense of responsibility and importance. They need authority, competence, the ability to command respect.
That seems foundational.
It is, but it's not just about being tough. Chapter 7 talks about harmonizing the army, making sure officers and men trust each other, and the commander. You need that unity.
Trust again. How is that built according to the text, especially in such a harsh environment?
Chapter X offers insights here. It emphasizes treating soldiers with humanity, understanding their needs, but maintaining firm, unwavering discipline. It's a balance.
Can you give an example?
The commentary often brings up Wu Qi, another famous general. He apparently ate the same food as his men, wore no cloak when they had none, slept on the bale ground with them, and even personally tended to their wounds. That builds loyalty.
Sharing their hardships.
Exactly. But he was also incredibly strict when it came to order. So it's that combination, care and compassion backed by iron discipline. The troops know you care, but they also know what's expected.
That makes sense. For listeners, that's relatable in any leadership context, empathy plus clear standards. Are there pitfalls the leader needs to avoid on this journey? Personal flaws?
Oh, yes. Chapter 8 explicitly lists 5 dangerous faults in a general. Recklessness, which leads to destruction. Cowardice, which leads to capture. A hasty temper, which can be provoked by insults. A delicacy of honor, which is sensitive to shame. And over-solicitude for his men, which exposes him to worry and trouble.
Those seem quite specific. Over-solicitude. Caring too much.
It sounds counterintuitive, right? But the idea is that if the general is so worried about casualties or hardship that they become hesitant or indecisive, it can actually lead to worse outcomes. They can't let sentiment override necessary, albeit hard, decisions.
The tough balance to strike. What about the leader's relationship upwards with the sovereign or the ruler?
That's another critical dynamic. Chapter 3 warns about the sovereign interfering in command when they don't understand the military situation.
Meddling from above.
Pretty much. Trying to run an army like a kingdom, appointing commanders inappropriately, giving orders from afar without knowing the conditions on the ground. All these can cause confusion, undermine the general's authority, and shake the soldier's confidence.
So ideally, the leader needs autonomy.
Ideally, yes. The sovereign needs to trust the capable general they've appointed and let them command based on the realities of the situation. There needs to be alignment, but not micromanagement that hinders effective action.
A familiar challenge for many leaders, I imagine. Okay, let's turn to the troops, the soldiers themselves. What's their role in this journey, from the leader's perspective?
They are the instrument, the body of the army. The leader provides the direction, the will, but the troops provide the energy and execution. Their morale, their spirit is paramount.
How does the leader manage that spirit?
Chapter 7 mentions things like drums and banners, signals not just for commands, but also to focus attention, create unity, inspire courage, and control fear. It's about managing the psychology of the group.
Using tools to maintain focus and morale.
Right. And Chapter 5 talks about combined energy. The skilled leader doesn't just use individual soldiers, they harness the collective force. The synergy of the well-organized, well-motivated army, it's more than the sum of its parts.
So for listeners, it's about creating that team cohesion where everyone pulls together effectively.
Exactly. The soldiers need to be vigilant, responsive, and trust the leader's commands implicitly, especially in fast-moving tactical situations. That requires training, discipline, and that trust we keep mentioning.
It all seems interconnected. Now, we have to circle back to deception and intelligence because they seem so central. You mentioned espionage specifically.
Yes, Chapter 13 is entirely devoted to the use of spies. It's treated not as some shady sideline, but as absolutely essential.
Why so critical?
Because foreknowledge, knowing the enemy's dispositions, plans, strengths, weaknesses, is what allows the leader to plan effectively, to use deception strategically, to strike at the right time and place. Without good intelligence, you're guessing.
And Sun Tzu categorizes spies, doesn't he?
Yes, 5 types. Native spies, locals from the enemy district. Inward spies, officials within the enemy's government. Converted spies, enemy spies you've turned. Doomed spies, your own spies given false info to mislead the enemy if caught. And surviving spies, those who return with information.
That's incredibly sophisticated. A whole intelligence network. For you listening, imagine managing that kind of information flow.
It requires immense skill from the leader. The text says managing spies needs intuitive sagacity, benevolence, and straightforwardness, to ensure loyalty perhaps, subtle ingenuity. You need to be able to sift truth from falsehood, protect your sources, and use the intelligence wisely.
And it seems particularly high value is placed on converted spies.
Extremely high. They need to be treated exceptionally well, the text advises, because they can provide the most valuable inside information and potentially help recruit other spies. They are key to the whole system.
So the ideal leader is also a master spy handler. It adds another layer to this journey.
It absolutely does. Intelligence gathering and counterintelligence are woven into the fabric of their command.
Okay, alongside intelligence, we touched on Earth, the terrain. How deeply does the leader need to engage with the physical environment?
Fundamentally, Chapters 7, X, and Elec constantly emphasize knowing the ground. Mountains, forests, pitfalls, marshes, rivers, distances. The leader must be intimately familiar with the face of the country.
Why is that so crucial?
To turn it to their advantage. Knowing the terrain allows you to choose favorable positions for fighting or camping, like occupying high ground or sunny spots, as Chapter X suggests. It helps you anticipate enemy movements, avoid dangerous areas, and plan routes for marching and supply.
So the environment isn't just a backdrop, it's an active element in strategy.
Absolutely. Chapter 6 uses the analogy of water shaping its course according to the ground. Military tactics should be just as adaptable to the terrain. Different types of ground require different approaches. Chapter X even details 6 types of terrain and their implications.
Like accessible ground, entangling ground, temporizing ground.
Exactly. Each presents different challenges and opportunities. Understanding them is key to maneuvering effectively and ensuring the Army's safety and effectiveness.
And what about heaven, the broader conditions?
While the leader can't control the weather or the seasons, they must factor them into their plans. Rain can affect movement, cold can impact troop readiness, timing relative to seasons can influence supply availability. It's about awareness and adaptation to these larger forces.
So, for you listening, it's about understanding both the immediate operational context and the wider environmental factors that you can't control but must account for.
Precisely. A good leader is attuned to both.
We've mentioned morale, or spirit, multiple times. How does the leader actively cultivate and maintain it throughout this demanding journey?
It's a continuous effort. We talked about discipline and clear communication. Chapter 7 links spirit to circumstances. Armies are keenest in the morning, get sluggish later. The leader needs to manage this ebb and flow.
Understanding the psychology of the troops.
Yes. Avoiding actions that dampen spirits, like indecisiveness or visible signs of trouble. Using those signals, drums, flags, not just for orders, but to create a sense of shared purpose and momentum. Ensuring basic needs are met, as discussed with Wu Qi, also underpins morale.
It sounds like consistent, thoughtful leadership is the key.
It is, and this ties into another concept, momentum or energy, Xi in Chinese.
How does that work?
Chapter V talks about this. It's like building up potential energy and releasing it decisively. Think of rolling logs or stones down a hill, they gain unstoppable momentum.
So the leader creates this momentum.
Yes, through skillful organization, concentration of force, surprise, and speed. A well-executed maneuver, a sudden strike, can create a psychological and physical momentum that overwhelms the enemy. It allows even smaller forces to achieve great things.
So for you, it's about building on successes, creating a feeling of inevitable progress.
Exactly. Harnessing that collective energy and directing it like an unstoppable force at the critical point.
Okay. What about formations, the way the army is arranged? Does the art of war go into detail there?
It emphasizes the importance of proper marshaling and formations. Chapters 1 and V mention organization and dividing the army into units, but it doesn't actually prescribe specific diagrams or rigid structures like some other military texts might.
So it's more about the principle of good order.
Yes, the principle that structure, discipline, and clear subdivisions are essential for control, communication, and effectively applying both the Qing and Qi forces and generating that momentum. A well-ordered army is responsive and resilient.
So for listeners, it's about having a clear structure and organization in whatever you're doing, ensuring everyone knows their role.
Precisely. Structure enables flexibility and coordinated action.
Which brings us, inevitably, to the endpoints of this journey. Victory and defeat. What determines the outcome?
According to the text, victory isn't about luck. It stems directly from all the things we've discussed. The initial calculations, knowing yourself and the enemy, adapting to the situation, exploiting opportunities, maintaining morale and discipline, using deception effectively.
It's earned through mastery of the art.
Yes. Chapter 4 even says the greatest victory is the one won with ease, where the victory is obvious before the battle even starts because the preparations were so thorough. Making no mistakes is positioned as the key to establishing the certainty of victory.
So for you, success is the logical outcome of doing everything right along the way.
That's the ideal, yes. And conversely, defeat arises from failing in these areas.
How so?
Misjudging the enemy or yourself. Chapter 3 is huge on this. Poor planning, lack of discipline, the general's personal flaws, those 5 dangers we mentioned, failure to adapt to the terrain or conditions, ignoring intelligence, running out of resources due to protracted campaigns. Chapter X even lists specific ways a general can bring ruin upon their army through their own failings.
So defeat isn't just bad luck either. It's usually rooted in specific errors or shortcomings.
Exactly. The entire journey of the leader described in The Art of War is about mastering the principles that lead to victory and avoiding the pitfalls that lead to defeat. It's a constant process of learning, adapting, and applying these concepts.
It really does sound like a continuous, almost cyclical journey. Planning, assessing, acting, deceiving, adapting, leading, learning, all interconnected.
It is. And it's not just about military skill in isolation. It involves wisdom, psychological insight, logistical understanding, ethical considerations like the moral law and treatment of troops, and a deep connection to the environment. It's a holistic view of leadership in conflict.
So wrapping this up for you listening, we've traced this journey of the archetypal leader from The Art of War. We've seen how it starts with deep thought and calculation, moves through managing needs and resources, employs tactics like deception and maneuvering, requires specific leadership qualities, and a strong connection with the troops depends on understanding the environment and intelligence.
And ultimately navigates the path towards victory by mastering these elements and avoiding the causes of defeat.
And while this is all framed in ancient military strategy, the resonance for today seems pretty clear, doesn't it?
I certainly think so. The core principles, understanding your situation, planning carefully, knowing your opponent and yourself, managing resources wisely, leading with both empathy and discipline, adapting to change, the importance of morale and information, these are timeless.
They really provide a powerful lens for looking at challenges in business, in projects, maybe even in personal life, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Understanding these fundamental dynamics can really equip you to navigate complex situations more effectively and hopefully strive for those favorable outcomes.
Which leads us to maybe a final thought for you to ponder. In our world, which often feels like it rewards instant reactions and nonstop action.
The pressure to just do something.
Right. How can we consciously apply the wisdom we've talked about today? The wisdom of careful calculation, of strategic patience, of really understanding the terrain before acting, the kind of wisdom embodied by this ideal leader in The Art of War. How can we bring that into our own modern endeavors?
That's a really interesting question to leave people with. How do we integrate that ancient patience and foresight into our fast-paced lives? Something worth reflecting on.